In the stillness of a moonlit night, a pink-haired maid sat behind bars inside a cell-like room within a majestic palace, speaking to a white-haired young man who appeared deeply distressed. The maid inquired with astonishment and concern about what he had just said. The young man looked at her with a pale, pained face and addressed her as Miss Maid, advising her that it would be better for her not to come any closer to him. The maid wondered to herself how he could ask her to stay away while he was gripping her hand with such intense force. The pain seemed to intensify for the young man, and he let out a groan which startled the maid and made her step back. However, she quickly looked at him with worry and asked if he was all right. Then the young man asked her to touch him, a request that left her wondering in shock about his true meaning. Suddenly, without warning, the young man pulled her toward him with force, and she fell to the ground with him, screaming in surprise. The maid tried to object, rebuking him by saying he couldn't just grab someone so suddenly like that, but he paid no heed to her protest. Instead, he took her hand and placed it on his cheek, letting out a sigh of relief as he began to feel better. She looked at him in confusion and embarrassment while still on the ground, wondering how they had ended up in such a strange situation. Then, time rewinds a little to when the girl woke up to find herself in an unfamiliar place. She realized she had been transported to another world, finding herself serving as a maid in a strange location. She stood before the window in awe, examining her new appearance with her pink hair and the maid uniform she wore, amazed by the beauty of a face she did not recognize. Another maid with orange hair surprised her, suddenly approaching and calling her by the name Rosie, which triggered Rosie's confusion as she wondered about the girl's identity. The maid told her she was late and handed her a cleaning tool amidst Rosie's bewilderment. The maid urged her to hurry to the basement, reminding her that it was her turn to feed the monster, a word that struck Rosie like a bolt of lightning. Rosie repeated the words monster and feeding duty in confusion, feeling as though she remembered something but couldn't quite place it. Rosie wondered if this monster was merely an animal, especially since she was carrying a dog food bowl. But the other maid insisted that a monster remains a monster, and that a maid's virtue lies in quietly performing her assigned tasks, then pushed her toward the basement. Rosie walked down a dark corridor carrying the bowl, concluding that the monster might be some kind of dog and hoping the place wouldn't be too frightening. When she reached a massive locked gate guarded by a soldier, she decided to place the food on the ground and then tried to discover where she was. The guard opened the heavy gate for her and ordered her to set the food down and return immediately, increasing her tension. After entering through the gate, she felt terrified by the gloomy atmosphere and decided to put the bowl down and flee as quickly as possible. She placed the bowl on the floor cautiously, determined to leave before anything appeared. As she turned to go, her eyes caught a glowing eye emerging from the pitch darkness behind the bars. A hand reached out from the darkness and suddenly grabbed her ankle, preventing her from escaping and filling her with panic. The white-haired young man, looking extremely exhausted, stepped out of the darkness, and Rosie realized in shock that the one they called a monster was none other than a human being. The young man pleaded with her while she was still in a state of daze, processing that this person was the monster she had been sent to feed. He collapsed before her, begging her to give him medicine, explaining that he hadn't been able to take it for days and was in agonizing pain. Rosie agreed to help him as she saw him coughing violently, wondering how this person, who seemed like a normal human suffering from a serious illness, could be called a monster. She asked him where the medicine was, and he told her in a weak voice that it was supposed to be in her pocket. Rosie searched her pocket and pulled out a small glass vial containing a glowing purple liquid, wondering if this was the required medicine. The young man answered with an eager look, confirming it was, and begged her to give it to him immediately. But before she could hand him the medicine, the orange-haired maid appeared at the gate and called her name sharply, interrupting the scene. The maid confronted Rosie angrily, asking if she had been charmed by that monster, and sternly reminded her that she was forbidden from giving him medicine without permission from the master, which left Rosie puzzled as she repeated the word master in surprise. The maid insisted they leave immediately, warning Rosie that if she stayed any longer, the monster would completely ensnare her, and then dragged her away while the young man watched them in despair. As she was being pulled away, Rosie cast a worried look back at the young man who was left alone, suffering from painful coughing fits. Rosie made up her mind in an instant and decided to ignore the warnings. She intentionally dropped the medicine vial on the ground near the cell gate. As the vial fell, the young man looked at it in amazement, while Rosie turned her face slightly and whispered for him to drink it secretly. The young man remained alone in the darkness of his cell, looking at the medicine now within his reach, whispering the name Rosie in awe and gratitude. Rosie recalls that moment, admitting she didn't realize then that the obsessed protagonist would become so attached to her because of that single act. She discovered she had been transported into the world of a boys' love novel, where the story's hero would become her captive, insisting she could go nowhere without his permission. The events returned to after they left the cell, where the other maid was walking with Rosie in the corridor, asking anxiously if she had already fallen under the monster's spell. She told her that her behavior had become strange and that she had been absent-minded since meeting him. Rosie tried to feign indifference and laughed, claiming she was just deep in thought. But in reality, she was thinking about this beautiful man called a monster and the servants who seemed fascinated by him. She suddenly realized that this situation perfectly matched the events of a novel she knew, a wildly popular BL novel called Raised in the Mist. She began to recall details of the novel's world, which contained beings known as transcendentals. These transcendentals were humans blessed by God with power beyond human limits, making them entirely different from ordinary people. However, this immense power came at a heavy price: ruthless, excruciating pain. Their ordinary human bodies were unable to withstand their extraordinary blood, leaving them in constant agony as if lava were flowing through their veins. Reinhardt, the imprisoned young man, was one of those transcendentals in the novel. Rosie remembered that the novel's story begins when Reinhardt's power weakens, and Argent, the other party in the relationship, kidnaps him. Argent bound him in chains and deprived him of the mana suppressants, the medicine, that eased his pain. However, she also remembered that Reinhardt eventually succeeds in escaping and goes to war. Returning to her reality, the other maid was escorting her to her room, telling her to rest and assuring her she would feel better after a good sleep. Rosie stopped her suddenly to ask about the master mentioned earlier, and confusion appeared on the other maid's face. Surprised by Rosie's behavior, the maid explained she was talking about Marquis Avantes Argent, and Rosie repeated the name in shock. She immediately realized that this name also belonged to one of the characters in the novel, Raised in the Mist. Her eyes widened in horror as she wondered if she had truly become trapped inside the world of that novel. The other maid decided Rosie wasn't well and told her she would stay in her room today under her supervision, then locked the door and wished her a good night, leaving Rosie alone with her fears. Rosie sat in her room thinking she wasn't even tired, but she gave in and lay on her bed under the moonlight, indifferent to what tomorrow might hold. She closed her eyes, hoping everything that happened was just a dream that would vanish as soon as she woke up. But her hope evaporated the next morning when she found herself once again before the gloomy prison gate, realizing that what she had experienced was no dream. Anxiety took hold of her as she thought that if she were truly in the world of that novel, she was in big trouble. She remembered a pivotal event in the story. The maid who serves the monster for 10 days is chosen to be his personal lady-in-waiting. However, the fate of these maids was tragic, as they were beheaded every time Reinhardt tried to escape. And despite that, he never stopped trying. Rosie realized her future was at stake and decided she would do her best to avoid becoming his personal maid during the remaining 9 days. When she entered his room, she was surprised to see him in much better condition. He greeted her with a calm smile, welcoming her back. Rosie was shocked by this sudden change. He asked if something was wrong, and she answered stutteringly that it was nothing while she continued to offer him food. He told her with a charming smile that he had been thinking since yesterday of a way to repay her kindness, and Rosie couldn't help but notice again how incredibly handsome he was. She told him there was no need for that, and asked him to eat the meal she had brought. So he looked at the dog bowl in front of him. Then he looked up at her, smiling, and thanked her for bringing him food. Confusion seized her. She couldn't understand how he could thank her for food served in a dog bowl. This behavior was extremely strange, as the Reinhardt she knew from the original novel was not a kind person at all. He harbored hatred for everyone in the palace and felt no guilt when the servants who fell under his influence were beheaded because of him. She concluded that the only reason he was being kind to her was his desire for something, specifically the mana suppressant she gave him yesterday. She remembered that Lord Argent gave the maids a very tiny amount of this medicine to prevent accidents during Reinhardt's severe episodes. This small dose barely stopped the convulsions, but was not enough to ease his constant pain. Reinhardt finished his food and told her she could leave now, advising her to go eat her own meal as well. And Rosie agreed. As she picked up the empty bowl, she felt confused. Nothing unexpected had happened, and he didn't seem particularly fond of her. She thought to herself that if she could hold out for 9 more days, she would be safe. But as soon as she turned to leave, Reinhardt caught her from behind, embracing her and calling her Miss Maid. She gasped in terror, wondering what he was doing. He moved closer, whispering that he had been wondering about something for a while. He asked in a mysterious tone if she was wearing perfume, justifying it by saying a wonderful scent was emanating from her and he wanted to keep breathing it in. Rosie wondered in panic about the reason for his sudden behavior and, more importantly, how he had managed to reach her. She looked down to find the shackles that had bound him shattered on the floor. The chains were broken, and she wondered in horror when that had happened. He ignored her shock and smiled gently, repeating his question about whether he could know what kind of perfume she was wearing. Rosie realized she had been found out as she felt her heart pounding hard in her chest. She was at a loss. If she pushed him away too obviously, it might arouse his suspicion, and she wondered what she should do in this critical situation. In the midst of her confusion, the food bowl fell from her hand while she was still in his arms. In a desperate attempt to get out of the predicament, Rosie pretended to suddenly feel dizzy and fell backward. Reinhardt rushed to catch her anxiously, asking if she was okay. She apologized to him while lying in his arms, claiming she suffered from anemia and hadn't been able to take her medicine, while feeling deeply embarrassed by the situation. She wondered secretly if Reinhardt had noticed her trick, but he looked at her with a mocking smile, making her wonder if he would actually kill her. But he soon showed genuine concern and asked again if she really couldn't take her medicine, making her feel some relief because he apparently believed her lie. She stood up and thanked him for catching her and preventing her fall. She moved away from him, promising to tell him about the perfume next time in an attempt to escape the situation and leave. As she walked away, she couldn't get the image of the broken shackles out of her head. She knew that high-quality magical restraints couldn't just break on their own. She concluded there was a high probability that Reinhardt had broken them himself, which meant she would inevitably die if he managed to escape. Panic seized her, and she realized she had to inform the butler before something disastrous happened. She hurried out into the luxurious hallway, where she spotted the butler from a distance. She ran toward him at full speed, calling out and insisting it was serious. When she reached him, he greeted her with a cold look and asked indifferently what she wanted, making her hesitate for a moment. She stood before him in confusion, still holding the dirty food bowl in her hand. For a few moments, her mind wandered as she admired how remarkably handsome this butler was. He lost his patience and ordered her to leave if she had nothing to say. She gathered her courage and said she was the maid tasked with serving the monster, and had found that his shackles were broken, thinking to herself how Argent was the one who wanted to call Reinhardt a monster. His expression changed slightly, and he repeated her words, questioning the broken chain. So Rosie realized there was no room for error now. She added with a nervous smile that the break seemed intentional. The butler told her he would go check on it himself, but before she left, she began to notice the details of his appearance clearly for the first time, from his soft blonde hair that looked like molten gold, to his attractive, polished features and his green eyes that reminded her of a forest. She realized in shock that she had been too confused before to notice, but this description perfectly matched the description of the monster Argent in the novel. Her eyes widened in terror as she connected the dots, wondering if this man was Argent himself, the villain of the story. Argent looked at her with a scrutinizing gaze, thinking to himself that this maid seemed useful. In a desperate attempt to divert suspicion, Rosie denied it strongly, claiming she was clumsy and useless. Argent found her eccentric and asked for her name. After hesitating, she replied that those around her called her Rosie. Argent commented on her strange way of introducing herself and smiled, saying he would remember that, then turned to leave. Rosie sighed in despair as she watched him walk away, confirming to herself that no matter how she looked at him, he appeared exactly like Argent. Rosie wished to herself that Argent would forget about her and never pay her any attention. With her life now on the line, she realized she had to act very carefully during the remaining 9 days of her mandatory service. She decided the best way to survive was to stay as close to Reinhardt as possible. By watching him closely, she might be able to predict his next moves and avoid disaster. Thus, she entered his room the next day carrying his meal, but she was shocked to see him sitting on the floor, bleeding from his mouth with bruises visible on his face. Despite his injuries, he greeted her calmly, welcoming her arrival. Rosie was certain at that moment that what happened to him was undoubtedly Argent's doing. Argent must have punished him for breaking the shackles. Reinhardt calmly told her he had suffered minor injuries, but she looked at his condition and said these injuries were not minor at all. He asked with a faint smile if she was worried about him, and she answered to herself that what she felt was guilt, more than worry. She realized this happened because she had reported him and that she was the reason for his punishment. But at the same time, she knew she couldn't pretend not to see it next time, because that would mean her certain death. She sighed in confusion and anxiety, realizing the difficulty of her position. She stopped Reinhardt, asking him to wait for a moment, and left the food in front of him. She hurried out of the cell, saying she would at least bring him some ice to put on his bruises. On her way, she passed another maid with black hair, who looked at her in surprise, saying her face looked familiar. Rosie stopped suddenly, trying to remember who this maid was. She finally remembered. This maid, in the original story, was the one who secretly mixed a certain fruit into Reinhardt's food. That fruit was called flaret. Flaret fruit would arouse the instincts of transcendentals, appearing as an appetite for food or sexual desire. But the problem was that this fruit manifested in Reinhardt as a desire to kill. Rosie realized in horror that she had to stop this maid at any cost. If Reinhardt's bloodlust exploded, she would become just a toy in his hands. She thought about her inevitable fate. Either she would die at Reinhardt's hands, or if she miraculously survived that, the Marquis would execute her for failing to control him. The next day, Rosie went to the kitchen very early. The chef found her and asked why she was there outside of dinner time. She told him with a smile that she would take over the kitchen duties for now. The chef asked in confusion about the fate of the maid who usually worked there. Rosie said, remembering what she had done, that the maid had tripped and sprained her ankle when they collided yesterday. Rosie had intentionally tripped her and hadn't expected her to fall so hard, but the result was in her favor. She told the chef that since she was the one who caused her injury, she offered to cover her shifts, and that this was perfect since she was already responsible for feeding the monster anyway. The chef seemed convinced. The chef agreed to Rosie's request, asking her to start by cleaning the pile of dishes there, and she responded enthusiastically. Rosie felt satisfied. Everything was going according to her plan. Her strategy was simple: to stay glued to this kitchen to ensure no one slipped those fruits into Reinhardt's food. If she could prevent him from eating them, her chances of survival would increase significantly. As long as Reinhardt remained sane, she wouldn't provoke the Marquis's anger. She thought to herself that Reinhardt should thank her, as she was literally saving his life. While working hard washing dishes, she encouraged herself to hold on a little longer. The chef surprised her by offering her a piece of cake. She asked him in confusion why he was giving her cake, and he told her to eat it after finishing the cleaning. He told her, seriously, that she was the first maid he had seen who was this stupid, so he decided to reward her specially, whether she enjoyed it or not. Rosie wondered if he was insulting her to her face, but she felt he didn't mean it that way. She decided to smile for now and thanked him warmly, saying she would enjoy it. After finishing her work, she walked down the corridor carrying a tray, realizing it had taken longer than she expected, but everything was going according to plan. She remembered there was another danger lurking in this palace: the demon worshippers. Besides preventing Reinhardt from losing his mind, she had another mission: to find the demon worshippers hidden in this palace. This criminal organization had been rooted in the dark underworld of the Empire for ages. They committed all kinds of crimes, such as kidnapping people and offering them as sacrifices to their god. Most importantly, they hated transcendentals, because they were blessed by a god they despised, so they had been hunting innocent transcendentals for a long time. Reinhardt had also fallen into their trap and ended up as the Marquise's prisoner. Rosie realized she couldn't help Reinhardt escape, but during her service, she must ensure he doesn't suffer. That was the only way she could stay alive. She reached the cell door where the guard allowed her to enter as usual. When she entered, she was greeted by Reinhardt's voice saying she had finally arrived. He was sitting in the dark and said he thought she would return sooner, but she was a little late. She told him she had some things she had to take care of, then sat on her knees before him. She placed a bowl of delicious soup and bread before him and asked him to eat his dinner. He looked at the bowl in surprise, so she asked if he also liked sweets. She told him with a smile that she had accidentally brought a treat she received herself and that she couldn't give him all of it, but she would share half with him. He looked at her in silence while wondering to himself about the reason for this sudden change in her treatment of him. But Reinhardt was suspicious of her, wondering if she had done something to the food or received some kind of order from Argent. He told her that her master wouldn't allow this. She replied that the sweets would disappear as soon as he ate them, so no one would know. He explained to her that he wasn't just talking about the sweets. She whispered to him that she had stolen the bowl and ice while working in the kitchen, so they wouldn't notice. Rosie continued, telling him the ice would eventually melt and she would return the bowl to its place so she wouldn't be discovered. Then she asked him to hurry and eat his food before it got cold. Reinhardt began eating the soup, but noticed the taste was slightly different from usual for some reason. She replied while eating her piece of candy that it was normal. Even regular food might taste different sometimes. But Reinhardt continued to watch her suspiciously, wondering if she was pretending or if this kindness was real. He knew that the food served to him was usually mixed with drugs, but he realized that today's meal was completely free of them. This increased his confusion. He didn't understand the reason for this sudden kind treatment from her. After finishing his food, he addressed her directly, noting that she seemed exceptionally kind that day. Rosie replied firmly that she was always kind to the sick, then told him she would take the tray after he finished. Reinhardt smiled a cunning smile and responded to her words, asking if she meant she was only kind to the sick. Rosie was slightly confused and quickly corrected herself, emphasizing that she was always kind even to those who weren't sick. He looked at her and said he understood now, calling her the kind maid, while thinking to himself that it was strange. His mind always cleared whenever she was near him. He noticed that the moment he inhaled her scent, his painful transcendental impulses were suppressed. but at the same time, he felt an increasing desire to possess her for himself alone. As she prepared to leave, he concluded that if he wanted to win her heart, he would have to continue pretending to be sick for a long time to come. Rosie suddenly remembered his previous question about her perfume and told him she had looked into it and discovered she wasn't wearing any perfume at all. Reinhardt looked at her in surprise and asked if her memory problem was so serious that she needed to check on such a simple matter. Rosie claimed her memory was so bad that she sometimes didn't remember if she had eaten her meal or not. Reinhardt feigned pity for her, noting that she seemed very weak, especially since she seemed on the verge of fainting earlier, too. Then he added in a scrutinizing tone that it was surprising, telling her she might not be aware of it, but she possessed a strong, distinctive scent that didn't seem artificial, but rather like a natural body odor. He apologized to her if he had made her feel uncomfortable, and she sharply confirmed that she indeed felt that way. Then she demanded that, since he was bothering her, he should hold his breath. Reinhardt agreed to her strange request if that was her wish, while Rosie wondered in amazement if he would really hold his breath. Elsewhere in the palace, a maid was scolding another maid severely, wondering how she hadn't managed to slip the required item into the food all day. The other maid replied that Rosie, the maid responsible for serving the meals, had been watching her the entire time. The dark-haired maid described Rosie as a quiet girl of few words despite her striking appearance, wondering if their presence had coincided by chance while performing their duties. But she quickly dismissed the thought, saying such things happen, then ordered the other maid not to fail in her mission tomorrow and to ensure that item was slipped in no matter the cost. However, the other maid interrupted to tell her about a new problem. She informed her that Rosie had announced that from now on, she would always be the first to arrive at the kitchen. The dark-haired maid wondered in confusion about the reason for this sudden decision. The other maid told her that Rosie claimed she found the head chef's cooking so impressive that she wanted to learn from him up close, which shocked and amazed the two conspiring maids. Meanwhile, Rosie was feeling satisfied and relieved. Her trick had worked, and the head chef believed her. Flattery, allowing her to stay in the kitchen and monitor everything. The orange-haired maid noticed that Rosie had been looking happy and smiling since the morning, and asked if something good had happened to her, but Rosie denied it. Then, the maid asked her if she had heard the new news. She told her that Count Hertas's family was searching for their missing daughter. When Rosie heard the name Hertas, it felt familiar to her, and she soon remembered in shock. That was the family of Yurta Hertas, the villain and second obsessed male lead in the original novel. She remembered that Yurta appears as a villainous character who constantly interferes in Argent's affairs. The reason was that Argent had killed his missing younger sister. When the sister he had long searched for returned to him as a lifeless body, Yurta approached Argent with a heart full of a quest for revenge. As events progressed, and as secondary leads often do, he developed feelings for Argent. But they were obsessed and destructive feelings, showing deep madness and a desire to destroy Argent if he couldn't possess him. Rosie returned to reality, wondering why the Count's family was mentioned now. The maid told her the daughter had run away 2 years ago and that there was a huge reward for whoever finds her, worth the price of an entire palace. Rosie was stunned by the size of the reward. Rosie wondered why they were searching for her now after all this time. The maid guessed the nobles might be planning a political marriage for her. She added that there were no pictures of her, but she was known for her pink hair and eyes, which made Rosie think about it silently. The maid noticed the resemblance and pointed out that Rosie also had pink hair and eyes. Rosie thought ironically that she didn't expect to be discovered so easily, and the truth was that she was indeed the daughter of Count Hertas's family. A group of other maids interrupted their conversation and approached them. One of them called Rosie's name. After giving a greeting, the maid said she noticed Rosie was having a hard time serving the monster. She and her colleagues offered to take over the task for her. Rosie immediately grew suspicious, wondering to herself about their new scheme. In the past, they hated this task and shirked it, and now suddenly they wanted to help her, especially since they weren't close to her at all. Despite her suspicions, Rosie pretended to be happy and thanked them, expressing her gratitude for having kind colleagues who cared about her. The maids were glad she fell into the trap, and one said it wasn't worth the thanks and they would take over the task from now on. But Rosie interrupted her with a kind smile, insisting it was fine and that she couldn't dump her work on them because they were busy too. They tried to insist they wanted to help, but Rosie politely refused, saying her task was nothing more than delivering food and leaving and that it wasn't difficult at all. The maids gave up and left, while Rosie and her orange-haired colleague watched them. Her colleague commented that their sudden behavior was very suspicious, and Rosie agreed. Her colleague suddenly warned her she would be late for mealtime and offered to clean their tools so Rosie could hurry to the kitchen, and Rosie thanked her. Rosie thought as she hurried on her way that thanks to her colleague, she wouldn't be late. However, the suspicious behavior of the maids she encountered earlier continued to worry her. She wondered to herself if someone had started moving in the shadows. Therefore, she decided she had to be more careful from now on as she made her way toward the familiar cell. When she reached the gate, she was greeted by the guard, to whom she returned the greeting and thanked him for his hard work. The guard returned the greeting in turn, then allowed her to enter after opening the cell gate for her. Rosie entered, telling Reinhardt she had brought his meal and apologizing for not being able to bring ice today because it was unavailable. But she froze in place as soon as she saw him. He had collapsed on the floor in a much worse state than the previous day. His clothes were completely torn, and his body was covered in wounds and injuries that seemed more severe than yesterday's. Rosie wondered anxiously if Argent was the culprit again, but she ruled that out, as the usual time for his punishment hadn't come yet. When she took a closer look, she noticed the shape of the wounds and the way his clothes were torn were strange. The injuries didn't look like they resulted from an attack with a knife or any sharp weapon. Instead, they looked like they resulted from something he had been waiting for impatiently. It was then that she realized in a moment of horror the true possibility of what happened. She remembered that Argent loved beautiful things and strongly hated for his collections to suffer any damage. Therefore, even when he punished Reinhardt, he didn't leave serious, disfiguring wounds on his body. Their relationship was complex, as Argent would come to see him after a period of time during which layers of love and hate had accumulated between them. If that were the case, the culprit could only be one other person. But what puzzled her was why Reinhardt had surrendered to being beaten this way. He possessed enough strength to overcome a simple guard even while shackled. Her thoughts were interrupted by Reinhardt's weak voice addressing her as maid, complaining that he was in great pain. She offered to bring him some medicine at lunchtime, but he asked her, reproachfully, if that was all she could do, reminding her she had said she would be kind to the sick. Then he asked her with a sharp look if this was her way of showing kindness. Rosie felt that his blue eyes, which usually resembled a calm lake, had turned today into a raging, stormy sea. She was overcome by a feeling that if she continued to look at them, the massive waves would wash her away, and that she would drown in those depths without being able to survive. He moved closer to her and told her she had a special, distinctive scent different from anyone else. He explained to her that when he inhaled her fragrance, his mind cleared completely, and the pain ravaging his body vanished as if it had never existed. He emphasized that this amazing effect happened even without taking mana suppressants, then calmly asked her what she thought the reason was. Fear took hold of her as she imagined for a moment what would happen if she met Reinhardt outside this prison without him being bound by chains. She realized that in that case, he would capture her completely and dissect her precisely to satisfy his obsessed curiosity about her. She stepped back slightly and said it was a relief his pain was gone, as that was the good thing in everything that happened. But she soon concluded that this wasn't what was important right now. She didn't know what Reinhardt was thinking, but she was certain that if he suffered more harm, he might lose control of himself completely next time. Rosie realized she couldn't just stand by and watch what was happening. The next day, Rosie surprised her orange-haired colleague with her decision. She found her in the basement inside Reinhardt's cell, so she asked her in surprise if she was really going to stay there, and Rosie confirmed that. Rosie explained that the head maid had allowed her to work there, but her colleague insisted the problem wasn't the permission, but rather Rosie's behavior, which had become strange lately. Rosie smiled, trying to reassure her, and claimed she had always been eccentric. Then her colleague reminded her it was time for the maids to eat and asked her to come, so Rosie promised to catch up soon. After that, Rosie went to the guard and apologized for being busy, then asked him to come closer to help her with something. She was interrupted by Reinhardt's voice from inside the cell, who addressed her, asking if she didn't intend to approach him, but she replied firmly that she had no intention of doing so at all. She saw through his cunning trick. She realized he was trying to win her over with his beautiful face to use her in his escape plan, and she decided to herself that anyone else might be fooled by him, but she would never fall into his trap. Furthermore, she resolved to watch him closely as long as she had started. And she expected that after this implicit warning from her, he wouldn't dare harm anyone again. She thought to herself that her actions might seem exaggerated to those who didn't know the events of the original story. After finishing her work in the basement, she went up to catch her colleague, apologizing for the delay. Her colleague told her she was very hungry and wanted to eat quickly to go to the cleaning tasks. But as soon as they entered the servants' dining hall, they noticed the atmosphere was strange, as everyone was whispering and looking at them. One of the maids confronted them, so Rosie's colleague asked angrily why there was no food for them. The other maid replied coldly that the food service time had just ended, asking mockingly if something had gone wrong. Then she added that she heard the kitchen maid had changed and that she was now making grave mistakes and causing chaos at work. She continued her mockery. wondering if Rosie had been struck by some curse because of staying with that monster every day. Rosie's colleague replied angrily that the idea of a curse was ridiculous, so the other maid interrupted her, asking why it was ridiculous as long as the being in the basement was a monster. Then she pretended to fear that they would all be struck by the monster's curse. After that, she rudely asked them to stop bothering others and leave the place. Rosie faced her calmly, questioning why she should leave and emphasizing that as a worker in the palace, it was her right to eat her food here, and that her ridiculous logic wouldn't stop her. The maid responded by accusing Rosie of having already fallen in love with that monster, so Rosie advised her to watch her words. Then Rosie reminded her with a bold question about the identity of the one who brought that monster to the palace in the first place, noting that her words were considered a direct insult to the Marquis, and asked her if she was ready to take responsibility for that. The maid was confused and accused Rosie of hallucinating, considering it unacceptable to involve the Marquis in her ridiculous talk. But Rosie continued her attack, explaining that what she just said insulted all the maids who served that monster before, and advised her to stop embarrassing herself with this childish talk that no one would believe. After receiving this defeat, the maid withdrew angrily, ordering her colleague to follow her. Since that confrontation, that maid began secretly harassing Rosie, intentionally spilling juice on her apron, which almost caused her to be late for her duties. But after Rosie's colleague lost her temper and erupted in anger in the dining hall, that maid no longer dared to harass her publicly, but things became annoying in other ways. The other maid's treatment of Rosie changed completely, and she realized that her presence as the one responsible for Reinhardt's meals was not in the interest of that bullying maid's plans. It was then that Rosie connected the dots and realized that the maid was the one who ordered the kitchen maid to slip something into Reinhardt's food, and all the puzzles began to clear up before her. Rosie thought to herself that only 4 days remained until the end of her service to Reinhardt. Nevertheless, she had found nothing but consecutive troubles, whether from the bullying maids or from this man who would not stop feigning illness. She asked him again where it hurt, and he told her that he felt some discomfort in his stomach. He pleaded with her to nurse him, but she coldly refused, believing he would be fine on his own, and then simply asked him to eat his food while he reminded her of her promise to be kind to the sick. Reinhardt noticed that she treated the guard with kindness while appearing cold-hearted toward him. Rosie responded angrily in her mind that the reason was that the guard was not someone who might kill her at any moment. He asked her directly if she hated him, and she answered with complete honesty that she did. Reinhardt pretended to be saddened by her bluntness, but she replied that she was not the one being hurt in this situation, so it did not matter to her. Suddenly, his tone changed, and he referred to what she had said previously, that regular food might sometimes taste different. In an instant, the food bowl fell from his hand and he collapsed to the floor, coughing violently. Rosie was terrified and screamed his name. When she approached him, she felt his high body temperature and immediately realized that these symptoms perfectly matched the effects of the flaret fruit. Wondering in horror if they had placed it in his food again, confusion seized her as she had been, monitoring the situation carefully and did not understand how they managed to slip it into the food. But a strange feeling came over her, as she remembered hearing that the effect of the flaret fruit does not appear immediately. Rather, it accumulates in the body and only manifests after a while. His condition worsened, and he began to gasp with difficulty. Calling her maid, Rosie realized that his gaze had completely changed and that his eyes had become void of any consciousness. She concluded with fear that in this state, he would not be able to control his impulses, and she might end up killed at his hands. At that moment, Reinhardt was drowning in his agony, feeling as though his body was burning and his blood was boiling. He wondered why he was suffering alone, and a wild desire to destroy and kill everything grew inside him. In his delusional hallucinations, he imagined that if he killed this woman before him, would this pain vanish? Would he feel relief if he tasted the act of killing and slaughtered her brutally? Or perhaps if he drowned himself in her distinctive scent, would he finally feel better? But in the middle of the storm of his madness, a clear idea emerged. He could not kill her, for she was still useful to him. He realized that he needed this maid to be able to escape from this place. At that moment, Rosie was living through true terror, for she thought she was on the verge of death. He was looking at her with a gaze that suggested he truly intended to kill her, but he suddenly regained consciousness and stopped. Rosie realized she had survived by a miracle, and that if he had not been wearing those mana-suppressing shackles, she would now be among the dead. She wondered in bewilderment how the other maid managed to slip the fruit into the food, even though she was watching her closely. But one thing was certain to her. Mary, the bullying maid, was the one behind all of this. Meanwhile, Mary was in her room thinking that the effect of the medicine must have begun to appear by now. She wondered to herself why she hadn't resorted to an easier method, such as switching the monster's food ingredients or his spices, or any other of the many available ways. and she wondered why she had become so obsessed with harming Rosie to this extent. But she soon brushed these thoughts aside, considering it pathetic for a commoner girl to stand up to her. While Mary was deep in her thoughts about how to harm Rosie, the latter surprised her by suddenly appearing behind her, calmly greeting her. Mary jumped in terror and asked angrily what she wanted. Rosie replied with a fake smile that she wanted to consult her on a matter, as she had heard from the others that she was a woman of sound judgment. Mary wondered suspiciously what the matter was. So Rosie continued her acting, expressing her hope that Mary would listen to her. When Mary asked her why, Rosie held her hands warmly, claiming that she wished for them to become friends. Mary mocked this situation in her mind, believing that Rosie, who had been acting with pride, had finally come crawling back to her. She felt satisfied because she would not have to exert any effort to harm her anymore. Mary hid her true feelings and reluctantly agreed to listen to her. Then Rosie began telling her fabricated story, claiming she had been having strange dreams lately. She told her that in those dreams, she was eating a meal, but its taste was strange and different from usual. And because of that, she sneaked into the kitchen in her dream to check on the matter. And there she saw someone placing something suspicious in the food. Rosie continued her story, emphasizing that this matter was repeated over and over in her dreams, where someone was constantly slipping poison into the food, which made anxiety clearly visible on Mary's face. Then Rosie asked with feigned innocence if she had done something to make someone hold a grudge against her. After that, Rosie dropped her mask completely and whispered into Mary's ear in a sharp, accusatory tone, asking her if she was the culprit. Mary became flustered and defended herself angrily, challenging Rosie to produce evidence and asking mockingly who would believe a story based on a dream. But Rosie cleverly exploited her outburst of anger, asking her if she had just confessed to her crime. Mary tried to deny it, calling her words nonsense. Rosie commented with provocative calmness that Mary's intense agitation over some nonsense made it seem as if she were truly guilty. Amidst the whispers of the maids around them, Mary exploded in anger, asserting she had done nothing and demanding that Rosie not accuse the innocent. Without evidence, Rosie simply said calmly, "Fine then." At that moment, Rosie grabbed her hand and told her she had to go with her, which triggered Mary's panic and her questioning of their destination. Then they headed toward the butler. The butler noticed Mary's presence and called her name, and terror seized her as she recognized his identity. The butler grabbed the kitchen maid firmly and asked Mary directly if it was true that she conspired with this maid to harm their guest. Then he addressed the kitchen maid, ordering her to confess immediately what she was trying to put in the food, while Rosie monitored the situation and wondered to herself about the identity of this man called the butler. Rosie realized at that moment that the man she met previously was too handsome to be just a butler, and she concluded that person must have been the real Argent. Rosie decided the time had come to solve the problem before her once and for all, and she asked the kitchen maid in a sharp tone about the magnitude of the grave mistake she had committed. The maid tried to evade the situation and lied, claiming she was told that the substance would merely enhance the food's flavor. Rosie revealed that she had already spoken with her colleague Emily and the chef the previous day, making them witness the kitchen maid switching ingredients to place the medicine, emphasizing that the matter went beyond mere flavor enhancement. Emily stepped forward carrying an illustrated botanical guide and presented it to the butler, explaining that the identity of the substance the kitchen maid used was in this book. The butler asked her in admiration if she had discovered all of this by herself. Emily answered enthusiastically and loudly that she hadn't, and that Rosie was the one who discovered everything, which struck Rosie with shock and panic at this unexpected praise. Rosie felt despair, blaming Emily in her heart, for Emily was supposed to take the credit for herself. While Emily was happy with her performance and wondering if she had acted well, Emily continued her praise, explaining that Rosie was the first to notice the kitchen maid's suspicious behavior, while the butler looked at Rosie with admiration, commenting to himself that she was a very clever maid, which increased Rosie's frustration. The kitchen maid realized that everything was over and that further lying would only lead to dire consequences beyond just being fired. In a moment of despair, she decided she no longer had a choice but to confess the whole truth. The kitchen maid broke under the pressure and confessed that Mary was the one who gave her the orders, explaining that she exploited her need for money to treat her sick brother. She continued her confession, stating that Mary directly ordered her to slip poison into the food, which drove Mary to scream in shock and denial, claiming everything said was just a conspiracy to frame her, while Rosie watched the scene with coldness and confidence. Mary tried desperately to convince the butler she was innocent and that the kitchen maid was lying, while the kitchen maid pleaded in turn, insisting she could explain all the details. But the butler confronted Mary with a logical question, asking why a simple kitchen maid would risk everything to fabricate a charge against her. Mary screamed in a state of panic that she didn't know why, but she insisted on her innocence while Rosie followed her collapse with a look not void of satisfaction. The butler announced his decisive decision, asserting he would raise the entire matter to the Marquis, then issued his order to imprison the kitchen maid in the detention cell. Then he turned to Mary and ordered her to stay in her room to reflect on her actions, while the kitchen maid broke down in tears and Mary stood, shocked at her fate. Before leaving, the butler gave a final warning to Mary, explaining that although the current evidence was circumstantial, she would face a severe punishment once conclusive proof was found against her. Later, Emily was enthusiastically congratulating Rosie on her success. But Rosie was thinking about her next step, considering that solving this problem would pave the way for whoever came after her to serve Reinhardt. Their conversation was interrupted by the butler, who approached Rosie and unexpectedly offered her the position of a private lady-in-waiting. Amazement seized Rosie at this unexpected offer. At that moment, Emily was reflecting in her heart on how Rosie had changed. When she first came to the palace, she seemed sharp-tempered and sluggish, but she noticed that her personality and aura had completely shifted lately, a change she did not mind at all. Rosie woke from her shock and politely refused the butler's offer, apologizing for her inability to accept an exclusive lady-in-waiting position. Anxiety seized Emily as she saw Rosie's refusal, for she felt that the more her friend changed, the worse and more complicated things around her became. Emily remembered Mary's poisonous look and silently wished that no harm would come to Rosie. Near Reinhardt's cell, Mary was fuming with anger, complaining to the guard how Rosie had ruined her plan that was about to succeed. The man advised her to be quiet so they wouldn't be discovered. The man quietly wondered why she was so insistent on harming Rosie. She got angry at him and accused him of not siding with his lover. Mary exploded at him in anger, accusing him of siding with that bitch over her. He apologized hastily, then asked her why she had come, reminding her that the punishment for sneaking out of her room would be worse than imprisonment. Mary confidently declared she would create evidence to prove her innocence. The man asked her in confusion how she would do that. She explained her cunning plan. Since the kitchen maid is imprisoned and she is locked up, if poison continues to appear in the monster's food, it will inevitably prove her innocence. She asked him to help her implement this plan, and the man secretly agreed to her request. Meanwhile, Reinhardt was smiling in the darkness of his cell, thinking to himself that things were starting to become more exciting. The next day, while Rosie was on her way to serve the food, she was thinking that despite Mary's punishment, the other maids were still bullying her, which increased her determination to leave the palace as soon as her service period ended. But one of the guards suddenly stopped her, inquiring why she was late. Rosie was surprised by the presence of a strange man with fair hair standing next to the guard who initiated a smile and welcome. She wondered in bewilderment about his identity. The man approached her and mentioned he had heard she was the one serving the monster's meals, pretending to sympathize with her because this must be tiring extra work. Then he moved even closer, wondering if her work as a maid was generally exhausting. Rosie moved away from him and told him her task was simple and didn't go beyond serving food. While she wondered anxiously about the identity of this intrusive person, she wondered to herself if this man was Rosie's lover, given the way he touched her. But she soon thought of another possibility, which was that this man might just be an impudent and disgusting person trying to harass her. The stranger continued his polite talk, suggesting to Rosie that she turn to him if things became difficult, but she responded coldly, asking if he would do her work for her if she spoke to him. The man was flustered for a moment before denying that, while the guard monitoring the situation secretly placed a suspicious powder in Rosie's soup bowl. Rosie told him sharply that if he didn't intend to help her, she had to continue on her way, explaining she had a mission to deliver food to the person inside. The man laughed mockingly at her description of Reinhardt as the person inside, wondering why she didn't call him a monster like the rest, then asked her if the rumors about her falling under his curse were true. Rosie realized she was in trouble. If she continued talking to him, something bad would inevitably happen, but she maintained her composure and asked him in return how she should address him then. The man replied that a monster remains a monster, but Rosie responded wisely that she calls beings by their names, whether they are humans or animals. And since she didn't know his current name, she preferred to refer to him as the person inside, wondering if there was anything wrong with that. The man tried to evade the situation, but Rosie added with a fake smile that his way of talking made her feel as if she had committed some mistake, and that this bothered her a little. Rosie decided to end the conversation and told him she was going to serve the food, while he looked at her in suppressed anger, commenting to himself on her arrogance despite her being just a worthless maid. Rosie stopped in her tracks suddenly when she heard Reinhardt's voice from inside the cell, asking her in a mysterious tone if he was considered a human from her point of view. Rosie was struck by panic, wondering if he had heard everything that took place outside. Panic seized Rosie, for she realized her loud voice had implicated her. While the man was the one directing insults, it seemed as if she was the one caught speaking ill of Reinhardt. Rosie turned to Reinhardt and answered hesitantly that biologically she indeed considered him a human. Reinhardt smiled a charming smile and confirmed the truth of her words, so she calmly asked him to enjoy his meal, addressing him as Mr. Human. She placed the soup bowl before him and asked him to eat. Reinhardt thanked her quietly, while Rosie was still tense from the situation. But suddenly, Reinhardt intentionally dropped the bowl from his hand. The food scattered on the floor, and Rosie sat shocked by his action. She immediately apologized to him, unable to believe she had committed such a mistake for the first time, wondering if she had been lost in staring at him without realizing it. Reinhardt called her maid, and then told her coldly that he was disappointed. Rosie's eyes widened in shock, wondering if he was mocking her and if he had decided to abandon his pretense of kindness with such impudence. She composed herself and apologized again, promising she would bring him another bowl. But Reinhardt stopped her and smiled mockingly, saying she was more dull than he expected. Rosie wondered in anger if he was picking a fight over a spilled dish. She noticed he wouldn't stop smiling and asked angrily why he kept laughing. Reinhardt answered with a strange calmness that he didn't like seeing her in trouble, which triggered her bewilderment and amazement. Then he asked her if she had noticed anything strange upon entering, so Rosie thought of the strange man she met. Reinhardt added that the presence of a stranger would be perfect for drawing attention, so Rosie asked him to explain his words in detail. In her room, Mary was feeling anxious. Breakfast time had passed and no news had reached her yet. She was pacing her room angrily, wondering how that idiot could fail in a simple task, even though she risked everything to bring him that fruit. Suddenly, another maid entered, screaming her name to tell her that the monster had collapsed. While Mary was feeling victorious, whispers began to spread among the maids in the palace. They heard that the monster collapsed because of poison in his food, but since the accused Mary was locked in her room the whole time, they concluded that the real culprit was still at large. Before the butler, Rosie sat in a state of shock while he demanded an explanation for what happened. At that time, Mary was gloating over her, saying she deserved what happened to her after all her arrogance, while Emily was hugging Rosie crying, expressing her joy at her victory. Rosie looked at Mary with a sharp gaze, which sent a shiver through the latter's body. But Rosie soon painted a mysterious smile on her face, which triggered Mary's confusion and amazement. Rosie recalled what happened, explaining that after she listened to Reinhardt's story, she thought deeply about how to handle this complex situation. Rosie asked him about the meaning of drawing attention, he mentioned. But before he answered, he stipulated that she tell him what she would give him in return. Rosie answered firmly that she was ready to do anything for him except helping him escape. Reinhardt agreed to her condition. Then he offered her his counter-condition, which was that she too should play with him, instead of just watching the guard, which puzzled Rosie. Rosie wondered to herself in anger if he had misunderstood her monitoring of the guard and considered it a kind of play with him, realizing this situation was unfair and that Reinhardt was the cause of all these problems to begin with. Reinhardt began explaining Mary's plan, pointing out that the man Rosie met earlier aimed to distract her, so the guard could slip the medicine into his meal without her noticing. He revealed to her that a maid named Mary had visited him the previous night, and it was clear she intended to escalate things and take revenge on Rosie. He added that Mary seemed to be in a very close relationship with the guard. Therefore, the guard brought someone else to distract Rosie, who pretended to be interested in her so the guard could carry out his plan. Anger seized Rosie as she realized these bastards were putting her life at risk just because they were struggling for their survival, and she swore she would not forgive them and would not stand idly by. She told Reinhardt that she understood the situation and that they must give them a taste of their own medicine. Then she promised him she would take care of his revenge too, so he asked in surprise if she would take revenge for him. She told him she knew he was whipped by the guard, so Reinhardt realized she knew about the matter. But he told her she didn't need to take revenge for him, because he was whipped on purpose, which struck Rosie with shock. He explained with a smile that he did it to become sick, because she said she was kind to the sick. Rosie secretly called him a madman, but at the same time, she realized that this mad act of his would make it easier for her to arrange things. Rosie thought of Mary and the plot she devised and vowed to herself that she would return this plot to her exactly as it was. The events returned to the servants' hall, where the butler was asking Rosie how this matter could happen again while Mary, whom Rosie accused, was locked in her room the whole time. The maids began whispering and defending Mary, asserting she wasn't the culprit and must be working with the kitchen maid, and that Rosie was the one who framed her. One even claimed she saw Rosie bullying Mary before, while Emily looked at Rosie with concern. The butler advised her that silence would solve nothing, then ordered the guard to recount in detail what happened that morning. The guard testified that, as usual, Rosie brought the food and was holding onto it the whole time so no one else could tamper with it. When the butler asked him if there was anything out of the ordinary, the guard answered in the negative. At that moment, Emily burst into tears and hugged Rosie, pleading with her to say anything to defend herself. But Rosie answered calmly and confidently that she knew nothing about this matter. The butler confronted her angrily, wondering who could know then, and reminding her that entry to the kitchen was restricted to specific people by order of the Marquise. The butler continued his interrogation of Rosie, pointing out that Mary was locked up all day, making Rosie the most likely suspect. And he added that they investigated the head chef as a precaution, and that the other servants testified he was not the culprit. Rosie supported their testimony, asserting she didn't suspect the head chef either, for he wasn't that type of person, which made the chef feel moved by her trust in him. Then Rosie directed a direct question to the butler, wondering if he truly believed she was the culprit. The butler told her sternly he was not here to play with words and demanded she tell the truth immediately. Rosie answered that she understood, but she added that there was a matter that must be clarified first. Then she suddenly turned to Mary and confronted her directly, asking her for the reason for her action. Rosie continued her pressure, wondering if Mary thought they would have survived if the monster died because of that poison. Mary was shocked upon hearing the word poison. Rosie asked in a sharp tone if she felt fear now that things reached this point. Rosie whispered to her defiantly, demanding she confess to why she poisoned him. Confusion seized Mary, for she knew the fruit she used was not fatal, and she wondered in horror why the monster collapsed, and if Rosie had replaced it with a fatal poison already. Mary suddenly burst out laughing, believing Rosie had fallen into her own trap, and asked the butler if he didn't find the matter strange. Mary pointed to the contradiction, explaining that the accusation suddenly turned from just a fruit yesterday to poison today once she was accused, and she explicitly accused Rosie of orchestrating all this to harm the monster and frame her. Silence and tension prevailed among the maids, and Mary felt that the atmosphere was not in her favor as she expected. The butler asked Mary how she knew it was a fruit in the first place. Then Mary froze in her tracks when she realized she was the one who just mentioned that. Mary replied tensely, explaining that Rosie yesterday showed the botanical book to the butler, and it had nothing but that fruit, so the connection was logical for her. The butler interrupted her firmly, asserting everyone only knew the monster collapsed after taking medicine, and no one knew the medicine was actually a fruit except the real culprit. Mary's face turned pale as she realized her slip of the tongue had revealed her crime, and the sound of her plan's collapse was deafening. The butler immediately ordered the guards to take her away, amidst Mary's shock and her desperate attempt to object. He also ordered taking the guard who testified falsely in Mary's favor, stressing the necessity of interrogating him, too. Rosie breathed a sigh of relief, admitting to herself she thought about the possibility that things would escalate to this extent. For she realized that even if she told the butler her suspicions directly, she didn't have tangible physical evidence, and it would be easy for Mary to claim innocence and make the task of catching her difficult. So, she concluded the only certain way to trap her was to force her to confess herself through a slip of the tongue. She felt relieved that Mary swallowed the bait without hesitation and fell into the trap she cleverly set for her. And so the incident was resolved for the time being, and Mary was permanently expelled from the Marquis' palace. Rosie thought optimistically that the person who was torturing Reinhardt had been removed, and therefore the remaining time for her service should pass peacefully, but her expectations were not in place. For Reinhardt surprised her with a strange question, asking her with a cunning smile if he could take it off. Now, he approached her and grabbed her clothes, which made Rosie wonder in panic and bewilderment what on earth was happening now. She looked at Reinhardt deeply and wondered to herself if she had heard what he said previously correctly. Rosie realized she heard what he said correctly, so she confronted him, wondering mockingly if being beaten was one of his hobbies, asserting she saw him allowing the guard to beat him on purpose. Reinhardt smiled and denied having such a hobby, but he added with a strange offer that he would allow her to beat him if she wished, calling her by the title Miss Maid. Rosie answered that she personally finds no pleasure in harming others. Reinhardt expressed his regret for that, which made her wonder to herself how he could say that when he just denied having that hobby. But Reinhardt explained to her he meant her shoulder only and that he only needed to take a quick look at it. Rosie asked him in confusion about the reason. He promised her he would explain the matter to her if she allowed him to look at it. Although she wasn't sure what was happening, she thought to herself that since he was asking her for that, maybe there would be no harm in showing it to him. Then he added that she could refuse if she felt uncomfortable, asserting he didn't intend to force her to do anything. Rosie finally agreed and turned to give him a quick look at her shoulder. Rosie was surprised that he didn't untie the lace, but he didn't take a look. Instead, he asked her in a strange tone why she didn't refuse. Rosie answered with complete confidence that she didn't refuse because she was confident of her ability to kill him immediately if he tried to make any suspicious move. Besides, she thought to herself that revealing the shoulder was not a big deal in her original world. So she reassured herself that it was just a shoulder and that everything would be all right. Rosie moved part of her clothes to reveal her shoulder, then asked him if they were finished now. Then Rosie noticed he wasn't answering her, so she asked him what was wrong with him. He surprised her with a direct question about whether she was aware of demon worshippers, explaining that they carry a special tattoo of their own. He explained to her that to declare their loyalty to become the wings of the devil, they brand a mark near their shoulder blades. Confusion seized Rosie, and she wondered why he suddenly brought up the subject of demon worshippers. Reinhardt admitted to her he suspected she was one of them. Rosie asked him in shock how he could suspect an innocent person like her. He replied with a mysterious answer that he would accept her innocence for the time being, but he added he was surprised by the absence of the tattoo on her shoulder. She answered him mockingly. She wouldn't have shown it to him if it existed in the first place. So he confirmed to her he concluded now she wasn't among them. Rosie suddenly realized the reason for his suspicions and asked him if he suspected her because of the scent emanating from her. He answered in the affirmative, explaining he thought they might have changed their methods this time. Rosie felt terrified by the idea he had been suspecting her all this time, but she decided her work with him would end today anyway. She happily declared today was her last day on the food delivery mission, and that once she didn't have to see him again, she wouldn't have to fear for her life anymore. Reinhardt noticed she seemed in a good mood. She confirmed to him she had her reasons for that. Then she presented him with a basket full of potatoes. He asked her in confusion what that was. Rosie reminded him he asked her to stay by his side in exchange for information about Mary, and since she started acting comfortably, she brought him some potatoes to eat too. Reinhardt concluded she was trying to make him work now. Rosie cunningly admitted she was found out and promised him if he peeled the potatoes well, she would boil them and bring them to him. But before she finished her talk, Emily's voice interrupted her, screaming her name from behind the cell bars and telling her of an emergency. Emily urged her to come out quickly, for something happened. Reinhardt advised her to go. She confirmed to him she indeed intended to, but she ordered him before leaving to make sure to peel those potatoes because she would bring dinner later. Reinhardt asked with a smile if he would get a reward if he finished peeling the potatoes. Rosie promised him she would think about it, then left to meet Emily, who was waiting for her in bewilderment. While Reinhardt watched their departure from his cell, Emily confronted Rosie, wondering about her relationship with that monster. Rosie replied to her that she was the one who fed him. Emily explained she didn't mean that, but rather was asking about the reason for this friendly relationship between them. Rosie replied that Reinhardt always acts kindly. Emily strongly denied that, asserting he never acted this way with the other maids who served him. But she soon remembered the emergency for which she came and screamed that the situation was very bad. She told her it was worse than she imagined, for the Marquis summoned her to serve him in his bedroom, which made Rosie wonder to herself if he asked her to be his exclusive maid. Terror seized Rosie as she realized the meaning of bedroom service. Rosie immediately asked about the butler's location. Emily told her he was on the second floor, so they set off rushing toward him. In his cell, Reinhardt heard the phrase bedroom service. His features changed, and he crushed a potato in his hand out of intense anger. Despite her attempts to object, Rosie found herself pushed by force to stand before the Marquis' bedroom door. Despair seized her as she felt something wasn't going in her favor. The door opened to reveal a man with blonde hair who invited her to enter. Rosie knew he was the one who summoned her. She realized at that moment this man was Argent himself, and not the butler as she thought. Rosie immediately apologized for her previous mistake in not recognizing him, realizing she was deceived and that someone with such an appearance couldn't just be a minor character. Argent told her not to worry about that, then revealed to her he heard news of her refusal of the exclusive lady-in-waiting position. Rosie immediately understood this was the reason for her being summoned here. Argent asked her if she refused because of the rumors circulating about him being a monster. Rosie denied that, so he asked her about the real reason for her refusal. Rosie thought to herself that Argent was looking for an exclusive lady-in-waiting for Reinhardt, and since she was aware of Reinhardt's escape attempt and revealed Mary's crime, she seemed the ideal candidate in his eyes. She sighed in despair. In her attempt to avoid death, she ended up drawing Argent's attention instead. She told him she refused because she would be leaving this place soon. Argent repeated the word leaving in surprise. She explained to him she saved enough money to be able to achieve her childhood dream. When he asked her about this dream, she declared after hesitation that her dream was marriage. Argent looked at her in amazement. She confirmed that to him. Then he offered her a strange offer. If this is what she wants, she can choose any person from this palace, and he will allow her to marry him. His offer triggered Rosie's anger. She wondered to herself if he was trying to marry her off like animals. She explained to him she wants to marry someone she already loves. But Argent mocked her idea, considering it a futile wish and that love doesn't last long and she will end up miserable. Rosie expected this reaction from him, for she remembered from the novel that the young Argent never had his parents' love. It's natural for parents to care for their children, but Argent's parents never gave him that basic care. Because he didn't know the mistake wasn't his, he began to hate himself instead of them. He truly believed the reason for that was because he wasn't beautiful, but the truth was that Argent was a beautiful boy. But since he himself didn't believe that, he felt his beauty was worthless. And that was the first time Argent became obsessed with beauty. Rosie thought to herself that since Argent didn't have his parents' care, it was likely he saw love as unnecessary. Then she addressed him, admitting that love may not last forever. Exactly as he said. But she added that humans are not entirely rational beings, and for now, she wants to make a foolish choice. The course of the talk suddenly changed. Argent asked her about when she planned to leave the palace. She told him she thought she would leave within 15 days. Argent seemed surprised for a moment, then told her he wanted to tell her something. He revealed to her she was the first maid to realize Reinhardt's shackles were broken. Then he surprised her with a shocking confession. In truth, he was the one who broke them. Shock seized Rosie, and she wondered in amazement how that could be reasonable, and asked him if that was so. Why did he twist Reinhardt's ankle? Argent answered with a mocking smile that one cannot escape this palace just because a shackle broke, adding that Reinhardt's health isn't good anyway. Argent noticed another matter, which was that Reinhardt no longer asked for medicine lately. So he asked her directly about the reason for that. Rosie found herself in a predicament, so she apologized to him and confessed she was giving him the medicine, but she asserted it was just a small dose. Argent thought about the matter. That tiny amount wasn't enough to improve his condition, and he wondered to himself about the real reason behind that. Rosie wondered in her heart if the scent Reinhardt kept talking about was the reason, but she decided to keep the matter a secret from Argent because she wasn't sure yet. When Argent asked her again, Rosie feigned ignorance. She answered him that a simple maid like her couldn't know the reason. Argent seemed to believe her, commenting that what she says is true. Rosie decided it was time to leave, but he stopped her, wondering where she was going. Then he reminded her with a cunning smile that she was supposed to serve in his bedroom today. Rosie realized in shock that bedroom service was the real goal of her being summoned, so she immediately apologized, explaining she wasn't informed of that beforehand because she wasn't part of the bedroom duty schedule. Then she asked him with feigned innocence if he needed to change the bed sheets. Argent looked at her in silence for a moment. Then he asked her directly if she even knew what bedroom service meant. Rosie continued her pretense of innocence and insisted with a smile that she knew nothing, and she asked him if the mission didn't exceed cleaning the room and serving the marquise. Argent smiled. He told her to forget the matter and allowed her to go. Rosie felt relief because she survived this dangerous situation. In another place, the guard who helped Mary was running in a moonlit forest, happy he was still alive. He knew that if it weren't for the person sent to help him, he would have rotted in prison, and he cursed himself for trying to help Mary. He was grateful he was able to get most of the required information before being caught. He decided to take the money and disappear and made his way toward a secluded hut. He knocked on the door. A voice from inside allowed him to enter to find before him a person wearing a hooded cloak. Another hooded person asked him if he was the gatekeeper and expressed pleasure for his safe survival. The guard knelt, expressing deep gratitude to the hooded person who helped him escape from prison, but the man coldly ordered him to save his thanks for himself. The hooded man told him he found something interesting in the report the guard submitted. His interest was focused on that woman who reported the incident and asked, confirming if her name was Rosie. Then he asked the terrified guard to describe her appearance to him. At that moment, another person accompanying the hooded man intervened, suggesting to his master that the matter might be nothing more than a similarity in names. The master rebuked his follower, asking if he was talking back to him. The follower hastily denied that, explaining he was only expressing an opinion. The master ordered him to keep silent because he didn't need his thoughts, then directed his talk again to the guard, demanding he answer. The master repeated his question sternly about Rosie's descriptions. The guard answered she has pink hair and eyes, and a sharp gaze resembling that of cats, plus a mysterious aura surrounding her. Upon hearing this description, it seemed the master reached some conclusion as he gripped his hand firmly. Then he smiled a mysterious smile, thinking to himself that his runaway sister was playing some cute tricks, thus revealing his true identity. After that, the follower asked his master if he finished the cleaning. The follower confirmed the mission was carefully accomplished and asked if they would return to their area now, while a shovel appeared near a mound of dirt, hinting at the guard's fate. The master thought about his next step and remembered there was a banquet to be held soon at the palace of Marquis Avantes. And when his follower asked him if he would attend, the master thought to himself he didn't care about being a slave or anything else. His only concern was to see his dear sister this time, adding to himself in a threatening tone that his patience isn't great. Then the events returned to the past through a disturbing nightmare, where Rosie, who was 13 years old, was presented to a man. The man mocked her name and considered it rural and decided to change it to Rose Hertas to suit the family. One day while she was in the rose garden, she was attacked by a boy who hit her head with a stone. The boy called her a bug who dared to enter their home. Then he angrily ordered her to lower her eyes. He demanded she leave, and when she didn't respond immediately, he repeated his order violently. He fumed with rage and raised the stone, threatening her. But another younger boy with dark hair intervened and stopped his brother, asking him to stop. The older brother left angrily, leaving the little boy with Rose. The boy, who was none other than Yurta, turned to her and told her he had just saved her. But instead of thanking him, she coldly ordered him to leave too. She added she didn't want to see either of them and ordered them out. But he grabbed her violently, commenting that her attitude wasn't good, and calling her my sister in a scary tone. Rosie suddenly woke up from this nightmare, screaming in terror. Rosie wondered in bewilderment about the kind of dream she had just seen. The next day, Emily noticed the paleness of her face and asked if she hadn't slept well, so Rosie told her she had seen a nightmare. She had never had a dream like that before, and if her guess was correct, this dream was nothing but a memory of Rosie, the original owner of the body. She saw a face she had known before and realized that this meant Rosie was the older sister of the second obsessed character in the novel. She thought to herself how words could turn into truth and how the joke she made to Emily had become a reality. Then she decided to recall the details of that memory. Rosie and the second obsessed character were half-siblings, and it was clear she was not loved in that house. She wondered if this was the reason that drove her to run away from home. Then she got a job at Marquis Avantes' palace to earn her living. She felt pity for her, for it certainly wasn't easy for a noble girl raised in luxury to endure working as a maid. But this also meant that she did not want to return to that house at any cost. Although she didn't know what kind of life Rosie lived, she was certain that if she were caught and forced back, she would be in real danger, so she decided she must escape as soon as possible. While she was thinking about her plan, she suddenly found herself touching her hair and thought about dyeing it in the next area she would go to, but she wondered why she touched her hair involuntarily. Then she turned to Emily and asked her about the story of the missing count's daughter she mentioned earlier, and whether there was a picture of her. Emily told her she heard they intended to publish a picture of her, but the second young master made a big fuss, saying they couldn't recklessly publish his sister's face, so she wasn't sure about the matter. Rosie wondered to herself whether this was her good luck or her bad luck. Emily asked her why she was interested in the matter and if the reward had tempted her, so Rosie answered that it was just curiosity. Meanwhile, Reinhardt in his cell felt that his mana flow had decreased slightly. He confirmed that the scent emanating from that maid was what eased his pain. At first, he suspected she was a demon worshipper using some trick, but she didn't carry the wing tattoo on her back, and her behavior was completely wild. He described her in his mind as an impudent woman, for she was likely the only person who treated him as if he were only fit for peeling potatoes. She made him smile sincerely instead of the fake smile he was used to. He wondered to himself what would have happened if he pretended he couldn't resist the urge and left his mark on her. But he soon brushed this idea aside, considering himself a madman and asserting that he desperately needed that maid. He decided that if he escaped from here, he would take her with him, and until then, he would slowly decrease the distance between them and maintain a good relationship. The next day, a new maid came to serve the food and introduced herself as Ella, the new maid responsible for the meals. Reinhardt looked at her coldly, wondering to himself about the identity of this maid. In another place, the butler was calling Rosie, who confirmed her resignation to him. Rosie concluded that Argent must have already informed him of the matter, so she confirmed the truth of the news to him. The butler commented that jobs of this level are rare, and that it would be difficult for her to find work elsewhere without a letter of recommendation. When he asked her about the reason for her resignation, she told him she felt it was time to settle down, get married, and start a family. So the butler pointed out she was at a suitable age for marriage, remembering she was 23 years old. The butler expressed his regret, explaining he hoped she would accept the position of a private lady-in-waiting. But Rosie politely replied she was confident they would find a suitable person for the position in a short time. The butler finally accepted her decision and thanked her for her hard work throughout her service, so she exchanged the thanks with gratitude before turning to leave. But as soon as she left, the head maid was surprised by the appearance of another maid named Ella, who showed signs of extreme panic and confusion, so she asked her why she was in this place at this time. Ella didn't answer the head maid, but rushed toward Rosie and grabbed her, pleading with her to switch the meal delivery task with her, offering to do all her work the next day in return. Rosie looked at her calmly and reminded her that today was her specific turn to serve the food, but Ella burst out admitting she couldn't do it because she was so terrified. Ella continued her pleading, pointing out that Rosie had handled the matter skillfully before, to the point that the butler offered her the position of a private lady-in-waiting in appreciation of her work. Rosie refused her request, explaining that rules prevent a maid from taking the food shift twice, and that she, in any case, did not intend to accept the position of a private lady-in-waiting. Then, Ella's despair turned into anger, and she confronted Rosie, wondering if she didn't feel sorry for her. Then she blamed her, screaming that she was the one who got her into this situation because of her refusal of the job, and asked her if she didn't feel guilty at all, which prompted the butler to intervene and order her to stop. The butler tried to explain to Ella that everyone had performed this task before without complaint, and that he couldn't grant her an exception, but she expressed her extreme fear that the monster would lose his mind and attack her. Ella collapsed while crying, so Rosie looked at her for a moment and then asked her to wait. Rosie left and returned a short while later to offer Ella something that would help her in her mission. Ella wondered in bewilderment what she offered her, so Rosie told her it was a potato. Rosie explained her strange logic, pointing out she noticed that the man seemed to enjoy peeling potatoes, and she advised her to give it to him, asserting that would keep him quiet, which triggered the bewilderment of both Ella and the butler alike. Later, Ella thanked Rosie warmly for her advice, and she confirmed to her that what she said was true, and that the monster seemed to actually love potatoes, which surprised Rosie. But Rosie thought in wonder that she didn't understand why the potatoes he peeled appeared distorted and torn in this way. In another place, a dark-haired young man wearing luxurious clothes was asking his assistant named Essel what he thought of his appearance. The young man wondered if his sister would like his appearance too, but his assistant replied frankly that he didn't believe that Maid was truly his sister. The young man coldly rejected his assistant's opinion, considering it completely unimportant, which prompted the assistant to object that the matter was not just a personal issue. This young man was Yurta, who showed extreme obsession with Rosie and began searching for her desperately when she suddenly disappeared 2 years ago, but he was unable to find any trace of her. In a desperate attempt to find her, he risked everything and put a huge reward for whoever found her. But all he got in return was false and misleading information. Then suddenly, a discovery occurred, as information reached him about the presence of a pink-haired woman working in the Marquis's palace. And because of his extreme obsession, he wanted to check the matter immediately. But his assistant reminded him that the priority right now was to leave a good impression on Marquis Argent, the treasurer, to secure the mining rights he controlled in the Empire's lands. The Hertas family was in desperate need of these mines they never owned, especially since Yurta had been removed from the position of heir because he angered the head of the family. Therefore, he was in desperate need of these mining rights to regain his status, which meant he must stay in a good relationship with Marquis Cervantes. Thus, Count Yurta Hertas entered the palace. His assistant thought that they planted a spy in anticipation of the failure of the negotiations, but the only information they got was about a woman named Rosie, a subject that made his master act like a fool and was difficult to control. The assistant asked his master what he intended if it turned out that Maid was not his sister, so Yurta answered coldly that he would kill her, of course. The assistant warned him that killing a maid belonging to another family was unwise, and that Marquis Avantes might interpret that as an insult to his family. But Yurta responded angrily that she dared to deceive him. Yurta's assistant wondered in despair about the special thing in that sister that made his master obsessed with her to this extent, admitting his inability to understand it. Shock seized Rosie as she couldn't believe what she heard, wondering in horror if this truly was Yurta Hertas, the obsessed secondary lead in the novel. She realized she was the one intended by the title, Sister, although she doesn't share a single drop of blood with him, and wondered if he truly came all this way just to chase her. Confusion seized her, for she didn't leave behind any trace that could lead him to her, but she was certain the matter would end if he managed to catch her. When her colleague Emily noticed her confusion, she asked her what was wrong, so Rosie claimed she suffered from crowd phobia and felt nauseous when there were many people around her. Her colleague was surprised by the matter, for she hadn't told them before that she had such a condition, but Rosie justified that in her heart by the fact that she didn't know Yurta would be here. In a desperate attempt to escape, Rosie asked her colleague's permission to withdraw and return to her room, asserting she would work hard the next day to compensate for that. So her colleague agreed and advised her not to press herself. Rosie resolved the necessity of escaping while the opportunity was still available, but her plan failed. For while she was making her way out, she unintentionally collided with a nobleman, who fumed with rage and described her as a dirty peasant, wondering if she knew who he was. Panic seized her as she blamed her bad luck that dropped her into this predicament at this particular time. Her colleague hurried to her to check on her, while the nobleman was still screaming, wondering what was happening. Yurta heard the sound of the commotion and repeated the name Rosie in astonishment after spotting her from a distance. The nobleman continued his insult, demanding they apologize immediately, and despite her colleague's attempt to explain that Rosie was sick, he refused to listen, wondering impudently why he should care if she was sick. At that moment, Marquis Avantes intervened with firm calmness and asked the Viscount if it was truly necessary to raise his voice on such a happy occasion. The Viscount was confused upon seeing the Marquis, who placed his hand on his shoulder and reminded him they exerted great effort to create a festive atmosphere, and that he certainly wouldn't want to ruin it because of his bad mood. So the Viscount only apologized immediately. Her colleague checked on Rosie, who appeared in a state of shock. Then the Marquis ordered her colleague to take Rosie to her room immediately, so she thanked him for his intervention. While she was leaving, Emily's eyes met Yurta's for a fleeting moment. Later, her colleague expressed her relief at the Marquis's intervention and noticed that Rosie appeared very shocked by the incident, but Rosie reassured her that she was fine. Rosie was thinking that Yurta was heading toward her because of the commotion that occurred. She was completely certain that their eyes had met. Although she managed to avoid him thanks to Argent's intervention, she felt that her matter was over. She asked Emily to go back inside, asserting she would return to her room alone and that she was fine. Emily reluctantly agreed and asked her to call her if anything happened, so Rosie thanked her. But as soon as Emily left, Rosie was surprised by the appearance of Yurta's assistant, who addressed her as Miss Maid, then asked her mockingly if he should call her Lady Hurtas. Rosie tried to deny the matter and claimed he had mistaken the person's identity, but he told her his master didn't think so, and that he had a message to convey to her. He informed her that her master ordered her not to sleep tonight and that she must wait, for he will come to see her soon. After delivering his message, the assistant turned to leave, leaving Rosie alone with her inevitable fate. Despair seized her as she thought that Yurta was coming to see her. Rosie felt her body trembling without her control and realized these were the original Rosie's instincts that strongly rejected this meeting. She realized she must escape immediately, but she wondered where she could go, for there was no place to turn to. And if she escaped without a plan, she would be caught immediately. She wanted to go anywhere, as long as it was out of Yurta's reach, a place where she could feel safe. And in the midst of her despair, she only thought of one place, Reinhardt's cell. She stood before the cell gate, wondering if this was truly the right choice. In her desperate attempt to avoid danger, she felt as if she were escaping from a wolf to jump directly into a tiger's den. Luckily for her, she found the guard asleep. She found herself trapped between two choices: a mad wolf and a tiger who hadn't yet decided whether to attack or not. She wondered in bewilderment which of them was the right choice. Then she decided to open the cell lock cautiously. As soon as she entered, she was greeted by Reinhardt's voice, who addressed her as Miss Maid. He asked with a calm smile why she came only now, explaining that he had been waiting for her. Then he ordered her to come closer to him, but she coldly refused his request, declaring she didn't want that. Reinhardt reminded her that she came to see him, although she was not his maid responsible for his meals at the moment. Rosie admitted the truth of his words, but stayed in her place. In an instant, Reinhardt moved quickly and pulled her toward him, embracing her firmly. Rosie tried to object and asked him what he did to Ella this morning, so he wondered in bewilderment about Ella's identity. She explained to him that she was the maid who came to serve his meals today. He replied that he did nothing dangerous. Reinhardt told Rosie what happened. Ella was speaking ill of Rosie before him, so he only stared at her angrily, which made Ella feel uncomfortable, and Rosie concluded that this was the reason for Ella trembling like a terrified child. Reinhardt asked her if she saw him as a kind of bastard, so Rosie was surprised that he had noticed that. Reinhardt laughed, explaining he doesn't treat anyone this way, and that this behavior is reserved for her alone. Rosie expressed her hatred for this matter, so Reinhardt pointed out that it pained him when he saw expressions of contempt on her face. Rosie replied to him that it would be better for him to back off if that were the case. He held her hand and reminded her of what he said previously, that they needed to become closer. So Rosie asked him about the reason. He answered her while kissing her hand that he believed he would see her for a long time to come. Confusion seized Rosie as she wondered what he was talking about. Then Reinhardt asked her directly to help him leave this place, which triggered her surprise. He offered her in return to grant her any wish she wanted if she helped him escape, and that she only had to ask for what she wished. He reached out his hand toward her and promised her he would achieve what she wanted. Rosie thought that Reinhardt was always on the edge of crossing the lines, but this time he was pointing the death flag directly toward her. Nevertheless, she felt there was something illogical in all this. Rosie remembered that Reinhardt in the original novel never talked about escaping with anyone, but rather escaped alone. She wondered in bewilderment if something had changed in the original settings of the story without her knowledge. And if he possessed all this power, why did he ask her for help in the first place? She decided to ignore his request, so she told him she would pretend she hadn't heard anything and that she wouldn't tell the Marquis about the matter, but she demanded he not bring up this subject again. She explained to him that she didn't want to die because of a reckless act. Then Reinhardt's gaze changed and became cold and sharp. Rosie realized at that moment that she must leave this place immediately. She realized she could no longer guarantee the safety of the Marquise's palace anymore. She returned to her room and packed her belongings, deciding to go to the village first and stay in an inn. Then, with the coming of morning, she would take a ship and leave the capital, and would think about the rest of her plan later. She sneaked out of the palace cautiously, exploiting everyone's preoccupation with the preparations for the party and the weakness of the guard. She thought that since it was late, it would be difficult to find a carriage. But while she was trying to get out, she was surprised by the appearance of Yurta behind her, who asked her where she thought she was going. He grabbed her firmly before she could escape, declaring he had caught her. He embraced her firmly, declaring he had finally found her, calling her sister. Rosie immediately realized this voice belonged to Yurta Hertas, the obsessed secondary lead in this novel. She felt suffocated, and that just a light touch from him caused her intense discomfort. Yurta asked her the reason for her escape, wondering if it was because she left alone for the academy, and reminded her that he told her they should go together. He explained to her she said she didn't want to go, so he went alone, but he didn't understand why she abandoned him and left, admitting she was the first person to test his patience to this extent. He held her face and asked her mockingly if she enjoyed playing the role of the maid, then told her the time to return had come. But she pushed him away and asked him defiantly who he thought he was to do that. She faced him angrily, wondering if he still didn't know the reason for her leaving that house, and reminded him that if someone is discarded, they should have the sense to back off. She firmly declared she would never return to that house. He called her by the title sister, and warned her it was wise not to provoke him. Despite her feeling of discomfort, she felt a strange calmness and concluded this might be the effect of the original Rosie, who was always resilient in the face of bullying. Although she didn't know all the details of their situation, she realized that escaping from this situation was the highest priority and declared again that she loves this place and will never return. Yurta commented mockingly that she, as usual, only gives the worst possible answers. He described her as cruel and added that although she abandoned him, he does not intend to let her go ever, and tried to grab her again, so she screamed at him to leave her. He asked her how miserable he was during the last 2 years, so she replied to him that she had no idea how comfortable she was during that period. He told her that after her disappearance, he started taking mana suppressants again, but it was very bad, which triggered her bewilderment. Rosie suddenly remembered that Yurta was also one of the Transcendentals, and one of the few who could stand on an equal footing with Reinhardt. Yurta admitted to her that even after taking the mana suppressant, just being away from her made him feel as if his whole body was burning, which struck Rosie with shock and amazement. Rosie immediately remembered that Reinhardt had said something similar. He told her the scent emanating from her eased his pain, but she thought then that was just a trick from him to convince her to help him escape, so she wondered in bewilderment if that were the truth already. Amazement seized her as she thought how the original Rosie's character was not highlighted much in the events of the novel. Despite all this importance she seemed to be gaining now. Yurta interrupted her thoughts as he raised her chin, vowing to her he would prepare shackles when they returned home so she could never escape from him again. Rosie realized in horror that this situation was much worse than just facing death, for a person more insane and obsessed than Argent himself had appeared now. Despair seized her as she imagined her fate. If he managed to return her with him, she would spend the rest of her life bound in shackles by his side, just a tool to soothe his pain. In the midst of this critical situation, a firm voice interrupted them, asking coldly what Yurta was doing holding his maid. Argent appeared suddenly and faced Yurta with a look of contempt, advising him in a mocking tone that if he were lustful, he should crawl to the red light district and not practice his dirty deeds on his property. Yurta tried to handle the situation and said there was a misunderstanding, but Rosie interrupted him, explaining to the Marquis that the young master was completely drunk. Rosie continued her claim that Yurta was so drunk he mistook her identity and called her sister repeatedly, while Argent listened to her with a scrutinizing gaze. Argent smiled a cunning smile and addressed Yurta, commenting that he heard a lot about his reputation, then asked him if his only sister had truly been lost. Argent continued his mockery, explaining it would be extremely annoying for Yurta to mistake his maid for his missing sister, which triggered Yurta's anger, who sharply repeated the word, "Your maid?" Argent declared he would pretend he didn't see Yurta's drunken behavior and ordered him to leave his maid immediately. So Rosie felt relief because Argent took the initiative, but Yurta did not respond. Rather, he asked sharply about the meaning of "your maid," so Argent answered him that this girl was special to him to some extent. Then Argent dropped his bomb, declaring before him that Rosie was the one who serves him in his bedroom, which struck Rosie with complete shock. Anger seized Rosie, so she described Argent in her mind as a madman. Rosie thought in despair how Argent had implicated her with this dangerous claim just because she almost changed his bedsheets once, and how this would increase Yurta's misunderstanding and madness. Yurta turned to her, his eyes flashing sparks, wondering about the meaning of what Argent said, so Rosie realized his looks had become completely insane. Argent coldly declared she was his maid and not Yurta's sister, then addressed Yurta, saying he hadn't regained his consciousness yet. Rosie felt she wanted to leave this terrible place as soon as possible. Yurta whispered in her ear that if that was truly her wish, he would back off for now, but he vowed to her that she should look forward to what would happen next, which triggered Rosie's anxiety and her questioning of what he meant. Then Yurta turned to face Argent, declaring he would see him again, and left the place. After his departure, Rosie breathed a sigh of relief and thanked Argent for his help. Argent answered her coldly that he simply hates others touching what belongs to him, and despite Rosie's annoyance at being treated as property, she felt grateful for her escape from Yurta's grip. While she was thinking of an excuse to offer Argent to justify her escape attempt, especially since she was carrying her bag, Argent wondered about this dirty thing Rosie was carrying in her hands. Argent pointed to the garbage collection place and ordered her in a sharp tone to go and throw that garbage she was carrying immediately because it was inappropriate to continue holding it. Rosie wondered in suppressed anger if he just called her bag garbage and described him in her heart as a bastard. In the end, she couldn't sleep all night. She woke up the next morning screaming in despair, wondering what exactly happened to her last night and how she ultimately couldn't escape. Rosie woke up the next morning while still feeling confused. The mysterious words Yurta whispered in her ear last night remained stuck in her mind without understanding their true meaning. She remembered his clear threat that she should look forward to what would happen next, but she felt in her heart that she didn't want to know, rather that she shouldn't know to begin with. Rosie realized she fell into a predicament, and that leaving the Marquis's palace had become elusive at the moment. She became completely trapped. The moment she stepped out of the palace, Yurta would be able to catch her without doubt. Therefore, she decided that after having breakfast, she should go to the butler and tell him she would postpone her resignation. But before she could do that, Emily burst into her room screaming her name and asking her anxiously about her condition. Rosie tried to reassure her, claiming she was fine after having some rest, but Emily noticed her paleness and advised her not to exhaust herself further. Rosie asked her if any new matter had happened in the palace. Emily told her there was nothing important except that one of the guests would stay for an accommodation for a while, which triggered Rosie's curiosity. But her curiosity soon turned to shock and terror when Emily revealed to her the guest was the second young master of the Hertas family, Yurta himself. In another place, Yurta's assistant, Asel, was examining some papers while wondering in bewilderment what on earth was going through his master's head. Yurta faced Asel, who appeared exhausted, pointing out he hadn't slept well. Asel wondered in himself mockingly about the cause for that, but Asel ignored his interest, considering the matter was of no importance. Asel asked him directly about the reason for his sudden decision to stay in the Marquis's palace, and if something had happened the previous night. So Yurta answered him coldly that this was not his business, and that he had another matter he should attend to. Asel remained at a loss, unable to understand what prompted his master to act in this sudden way. Yurta interrupted his thoughts as he called him by his name, declaring he had a mission, must perform. With a cunning smile, Yurta revealed his plan, explaining that if his sister insisted on not returning with him, he had no choice but to make her forced to do so. Meanwhile, at the gate of Reinhardt's cell, the maid Ella stood hesitating, so Reinhardt called her from inside. Reinhardt asked her kindly to grant him one favor, which triggered Ella's bewilderment. She asked him tensely about the kind of favor he wanted. Reinhardt pointed to the basket of potatoes she brought him and asked her to boil them well, and then deliver them to the pink-haired maid, so Ella agreed to his request. But before she left, he added in a firm tone not to forget to tell her that he was the one who sent her. While watching her as she moved away, Reinhardt wondered to himself mockingly if he should go to bring that maid, in reference to his future plans. The next day, while Rosie was walking in the corridor, Emily suggested she rest for a longer time as long as she was still sick. But Rosie refused, asserting she couldn't cause annoyance to others and that she wouldn't get her pay if she continued to rest. She thought to herself that as long as Yurta was present in the palace, he would certainly watch her, so she decided that acting naturally and monitoring the situation was better than hiding. At that moment, Ella greeted her with a morning greeting. Ella asked her if she felt better after hearing she was sick yesterday. Rosie confirmed to her she was much better after rest, so Ella felt relief. Ella surprised Rosie by presenting a basket to her, explaining it contained boiled potatoes, so Rosie wondered in bewilderment why she was giving it to her. Ella told her with a smile that the monster was the one who asked her to deliver it to her, and wished her to enjoy it. Rosie and Emily examined the basket. Emily noticed with astonishment that all the potatoes had smiling faces drawn on them. Rosie remembered her last meeting with Reinhardt and how she refused his request to help him escape. Intense confusion seized her. She didn't understand how after her final refusal to him, he sends her potatoes with smiling faces. She wondered to herself if this man was truly insane while Reinhardt was smiling a cunning smile in his cell as he was breaking his shackles. Then a huge explosion occurred, leading to the destruction of his cell gate. While Rosie was drowned in her bewilderment, Reinhardt in his cell had finally broken his shackles, considering the matter was worth the trouble of studying those shackles, even while he was suffering from mana convulsions. Reinhardt stood free for the first time, realizing the sound of the broken shackles must have reached outside and that people would gather soon. Therefore, he decided that before that happened, he must find that maid urgently. He thought to himself that if she obeyed his words and agreed to help him, he wouldn't have been forced to look for her in this annoying way. He admitted his offer was impulsive, but he was willing to give her anything she wanted if she agreed to help him. His only condition was that she stay by his side for the rest of her life. He realized she was the most useful person for him at all. Her mere presence near him was enough to suppress the horrific mana convulsions he suffered from. Although he expected her refusal of his offer, he felt the distance between them, which seems elusive no matter how much he tries to reach it, was no longer acceptable. He could no longer bear this distance and realized that if he managed to leave this prison and escape with her, that distance would easily vanish. He smiled in confidence as he decided he would go to bring his difficult maid himself. Then he realized to himself that the term abduction might be more accurate to describe what he intended. While Rosie was in another place chatting with her colleagues, suddenly a commotion resounded throughout the palace. The maids wondered in bewilderment about the source of the sound, speculating a fire had occurred in the kitchen, but the sound was like an explosion, followed by the screaming of the maids in panic. One of the servants rushed screaming that an explosion had occurred in the basement and that the monster had escaped, ordering everyone to take cover in a safe place. Panic seized Emily, so she grabbed Rosie and urged her to evacuate immediately. But Rosie, with a strange calmness, asked Emily to go to a safe place while she would evaluate the situation, which triggered Emily's surprise. Emily tried to stop her, wondering about the meaning of evaluating the situation, and insisting on the necessity of her escape too, but Rosie dropped the potato basket from her hand and set off rushing. Rosie ran through the corridors while Emily was calling her name in vain. She stood in the garden, unable to believe what was happening, wondering if Reinhardt had truly escaped. She remembered that Reinhardt in the original novel only escaped after suffering endless torment at the hands of Argent. She realized in concern that the timing of his escape had advanced significantly from the events of the original story. She wondered about the reason and whether her intervention in the course of events led to that, especially since the relationship between Yurta and Argent became very sensitive after last night. The sound of a man's scream pleading for his life interrupted her thoughts. One of the servants was kneeling on the ground pleading before Reinhardt, who told him coldly it would be annoying for him to panic before doing anything. Reinhardt calmly explained he only wanted an answer to one question, which was was whether he had happened to see a pink-haired maid. Rosie was hiding behind the bushes, monitoring the scene in shock, while the terrified servant claimed he knew nothing. Reinhardt replied that this was not the answer he wanted, so Rosie realized he was looking for her. Confusion seized her. She didn't understand why he was looking specifically for her in a situation like this, where his focus was supposed to be on escaping only. She wondered if he intended to take revenge on her and thought about her treatment of him, wondering if she had been too harsh on him. Reinhardt warned the servant he was in a hurry and that if he didn't answer immediately, the consequences would be dire. The terrified servant pointed toward the stables, claiming he believed he saw her heading there, but Rosie didn't think he would respond to his hesitant answer. While Reinhardt was asking the terrified servant if he was sure he saw Rosie at the stables, the servant confirmed that to him in a state of terror, so Rosie decided to exploit this opportunity and escape while she was still able to. After Reinhardt let the servant escape, Rosie breathed a sigh of relief in her hiding place. But her joy didn't last long, for she broke a tree trunk which led to drawing Reinhardt's attention. Reinhardt suddenly stopped and looked in her direction, a dark look appearing on his face, so Rosie realized he had discovered her location. Meanwhile, inside the luxurious palace, Yurta was talking with one of the servants who introduced himself as Fram. Yurta noticed the continuous commotion outside and wondered about its source, so Fram apologized to him for the annoyance and promised him he would go to check on the matter immediately. The butler, Fram, excused himself for a moment to leave, but before he could take a single step, another servant surprised him as he burst into the place panting to tell him the matter was very urgent. The monster present in the basement had escaped, so the words fell on Yurta like a bolt of lightning while listening to the news. Yurta told Assel that the monster had finally escaped. Assel asked him if he meant the transcendental being Marquis Evantes was holding, for he heard he was bound in mana-suppressing shackles. Assel had a vague idea of the existence of this monster thanks to their spies' reports, who was none other than another transcendental, exactly like his master Yurta, and it seemed the Marquis was determined to hide his existence from the world, but he knew hiding the sun with a hand was impossible. Yurta thought in anger that his escape couldn't have come at a worse time than this, especially with him being in the palace. When the butler Fram asked the servant about the monster's location now, the servant told him rumors say he is currently looking for a pink-haired maid. Yurta ordered his assistant Asil to bring him his sword, which triggered the latter's bewilderment. Anger seized Yurta as he wondered how a mere monster dared to covet his sister, and declared he wouldn't allow her to be taken from him after traveling all this distance to find her. Yurta decided he must find her immediately before anyone else reached her. Meanwhile, in the garden, Reinhardt had approached Rosie's hiding place and ordered her to come out quietly. Then he gave her the choice between him going to her or her coming to him herself. Panic seized her, for she realized if he came closer, he would recognize her distinctive scent, and she realized she must escape. But he warned her she might regret it if she ran now. So Rosie wondered in despair what she should do. She thought to herself he would likely kill her if he caught her anyway, and in that case, she no longer had anything to lose and decided to run with all her might. But as soon as she tried to run, she felt a mysterious force striking her, and her body suddenly stopped moving. She felt suffocated and dizzy, as if the air around her was being sucked out from her and a storm was about to tear her body apart, and wondered in horror if this was the power of transcendentals like Reinhardt. She collapsed on the ground screaming in pain. Reinhardt stood over her, and she heard him wondering mockingly who it could be, believing it was a little mouse, but he found only the Miss Maid who was having difficulty breathing. Suddenly, she felt the pressure had vanished, and air finally returned to her lungs. Unable to believe she was on the verge of death, he faced her directly, wondering why she was avoiding him, so she asked him if he truly had to ask a question like that. He reached out his hand to wipe a tear from her cheek, which triggered her bewilderment. Then he told her he finds her beautiful even, while she cries, for that was what he actually thought. He admitted that he long imagined this scene, but seeing it on the ground was much better. Rosie thought in horror that this man had completely lost his mind. She wondered what kind of karma she had earned in her previous life to deserve this fate. After Yurta yesterday, it was Reinhardt's turn today. Reinhardt told her he had been looking for her for a long time, and that their meeting this way must be the act of fate. But Rosie wondered to herself mockingly whether her relationship was closer to enmity than to fate. Reinhardt insisted that what brought them together was fate, which triggered Rosie's bewilderment, who wondered to herself wasn't he trying to kill her just a few moments ago. Rosie faced him directly, wondering about the reason for his search for her and whether he intended to kill her. But he answered her question with a mocking question, wondering how he could think of killing her. When she repeated her question about the real reason, he answered her simply that fate was the reason while he was staring at her with intense focus that triggered her embarrassment. So she wished in despair if someone would make him silent. Realizing he wasn't listening to a single word of what she was saying, Reinhardt declared his intention clearly, explaining he came to take her with him no matter the cost. And although she expressed her refusal, he told her coldly that, unfortunately, she has no choice in this matter. So Rosie realized in anger that what was happening was nothing but an outright abduction. He told her he'd like to leave when she was ready, but unfortunately, time was catching up with them. So Rosie replied in her heart angrily that the reason was, of course, because he was abducting her. Then he reached out his hand toward her, inviting her to go with him. But she challenged him, wondering what would happen if she refused to take his hand. He looked at her seriously, explaining that at the moment, she is someone he badly needs, and advised her not to make a foolish choice. Then he presented his offer to her, explaining that although she didn't help him escape, he will grant her wealth and glory if she comes with him now. Rosie replied in her heart with biting mockery, commenting on his excessive generosity. Rosie thought for a moment about accepting Reinhardt's help to escape from Yurta immediately, but she soon realized that Reinhardt's motives didn't differ much from Yurta's motives, and that if she followed him now, she would be accused of helping him escape, and she might end up killed at the hands of Marquis Argent one day, and thus she would only increase the number of her enemies. At that moment, Yurta's voice interrupted them, appearing suddenly and wondering mockingly if she was planning to escape with another man right in front of him. With one sword strike, he cut his way through the fence while declaring he had finally found her. Shock seized Rosie as she couldn't believe he had cut his way through the wall so easily. Reinhardt commented calmly on the appearance of an intruder between them, so Rosie wondered in bewilderment about the nature of the relationship that brings them together, for she believed the matter didn't exceed her feeding him only. Yurta faced Reinhardt, pointing out he heard of Ivantes' monster escape, and mockingly offered him that he would please the Marquis when he delivers him to him. Then he directed his talk to Rosie, asking her to come to him, so Reinhardt repeated the word sister in astonishment. Rosie told Reinhardt that the young master must have returned to drinking in the afternoon again. Reinhardt noticed they already know each other, and showed his jealousy of the idea that she was meeting another man behind his back. So Rosie asked him to stop saying things he doesn't mean. But Yurta interrupted them with a look of contempt, commenting that she was mingling with the commoners in his absence. Rosie felt this situation seemed strangely familiar, and realized she was in the classic case of a shrimp's back breaks in a fight between two whales. Unfortunately, there was no one to protect the shrimp at the moment, so she concluded she must protect herself. Rosie began looking desperately for anything useful around her, and suddenly an idea flashed in her mind.